Welcome to this presentation for Kilted Ancestors. Kilted Ancestors is a private Facebook group set up as a meeting place for those with Scottish ancestry. Regardless if you research your own family history or not, preserving the stories handed down by your parents or grandparents is so important. The group is an amazing place to not only share the challenges faced in your own research, but to obtain inspiration to tell the story of your own family's journey. 2022 is Scotland's Year of Stories, and during this year, Claire Wilson and Christine Woodcock will be bringing a whole host of free events and activities to group members, many of them via Facebook Live events. You can join the group by searching Kilted Ancestors on Facebook, or if you would like to subscribe to the newsletter, visit www.treehousegenealogy.co.uk/Kilted Ancestors. Taking things that bit further, Claire and Christine have also set up a quarterly virtual conference named Kilted Culture, which again embraces Scotland's Year of Stories. This is based on 4 separate themes and has some really amazing guest speakers. You can book 1, 2, 3, or all of the events, and if you book all 4, you will obtain a free bonus event which will show you how to pull your own family story together. You can view details of the speakers and topics and book now via Christine's website at www.genealogyvic.com. And let's move on with today's speaker.
Well, hello, and I'm wondering if you've ever heard of the water horse, sometimes called Echushka. You may well have heard of the Kelpie, because we have the Kelpies that we can see in Falkirk in Scotland. But I'm going to tell you a story of who may be an ancestor of mine even, for I am associated with the MacGregor clan myself. And it was in days gone by when a certain crofter, Donald MacGregor, had a shaling, a small cabin, up in the hills, in a glen near a great loch. I'll leave you to think of which one it could be. He had but one daughter, and all his friends would tell him, you know, you really shouldn't live there. You should move beyond the burn. It'll be safer beyond the burn. And he would cast them away. Away you go. It's good grazing there for my cattle. It's great there for all of my needs. There's the water, there's the glen, there's good grass and a good living there. And they would tut and, what are you doing? You need to know there's a monster in that loch. Why, well, I've never seen him, he said. And he would go on his way, cursing them under his breath just a little bit, because he was a little bit of a curmudgeon. This daughter he had, though, she was just about to come into her teenage years, about to turn into a woman, she thought. Her mother had died earlier in her life, but she had been around long enough to teach Morag to spin. And it was how she would spend her day outside of the shaling with her spinning wheel and her wool, spinning the cloth that she needed to spin to clothe them and make a little bit extra money by spinning other people's clothes too. It was her job, because there was no other, apart from her father, to go and call the cattle in to the protection of the shaling every night, but before dusk. And she'd wondered about this a long time, but she'd got to go up and go and get the cattle. So, you know, she put the spinning away this day. And she put a bit of cheese and a bit of bread into her apron pocket, along with her comb, because somehow she always became very unkempt. And she was starting not to like that idea. For there were boys who were starting to look at her differently now. So perhaps she should keep a comb with her and comb her hair. Off she went on a beautiful afternoon. The sun had been shining all day, and she was glad of it, the walk and her bare foot going through the grass cool and a little bit damp even still. She was going up to call the cattle, and they were up by the shores of the loch. She'd heard stories, of course she had. She'd heard people talking to her father about the monster. Every so often she'd gaze at the waters, still and deep and dark. And she'd have a wee think, and then shake it off as a girl's fancy. She kept walking and she kept dreaming and she kept thinking of the life that she would have and how things would be, as girls of that age will be wont to do. She was starting to get a little bit willful and really getting resentful of having to do all this work all the time. Where was her father anyway while she was doing this? Probably off down the pub, which was a long way to go, so sometimes he didn't really get back as soon as he could. And she did worry if he came back after dark, because the road was not all that clear. And of course, there were the stories. But she'd shrug them off, and she'd go up, and she'd call the cattle. And of course, cattle being cattle, they didn't really want to come away. So she'd have to wander around, and she lost her time, wandering around, dreaming a little bit, calling in the cattle, the stragglers, bringing them into the fold and coming down. And she had to pass by the shores of the loch. And as she drove the cattle forward, she was singing a little bit to herself and just having a little look around, wandering, as you do. What was that on the shoreline? That was something. Was that a man? My goodness, it looks like he's in trouble. I should go and help, she thought. Maybe not, but maybe I should. So curiosity got the better of her, and she went over, and there was this young man lying between the loch and the beach, just on the shoreline. She went over and she nudged him a little with her foot. "Are you all right, sir?" He groaned a little bit. "Oh, you're alive then." And she knelt towards him and she took a better look. His face was very handsome and he looked quite young. Older than her though, but still, he was very comely to look at. "Would you not like to get up, sir, and come away from the waves because you're going to catch your death of cold?" He opened his eyes better to look and saw her. And he said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I fell in the water from my boat. And I think the boat is gone. And I almost drowned. And I'm just so tired." His voice was mellow and lovely to hear. There was a lilt there, an accent she'd never quite known before. This was even better. She'd have so much to tell her friends when she next went to church. "All right then, let's get you up off here then and get you a little bit higher into what's left of the sun and see if we can dry you off a bit." She was taking charge because she was a young woman now. She had something to take charge of. She'd forgotten about the cattle, who were quietly munching their way around the edge grasses, happy. She looked at the man again, and there was something about him. There was just something she couldn't quite put her finger on. But she was wrapped in the whole adventure of it all. And she helped him stumble and fall up a little bit to the shoreline. And they sat in the sand, and he laid his head on her lap. And she noticed that his hair was knotted and it was all very unkempt. And didn't she have a comb in her pocket that could do something for this? And out it came, and she said, "Just rest your head there, rest, you must be very tired. We've got a little time before the sun goes down to get you well enough to walk. I've got a bit of cheese here and some bread if you'd like. And he indicated no. It seemed he was just happy to lay his head on her lap and sleep a little as she combed his hair. She was in the way of doing that when the comb snagged. She didn't want to pull too hard because she didn't want to wake him from his almost slumber. It snagged a little more and she pulled a little harder. And then the comb came out and she looked. Oh dear. Everything started to tumble into her head at the sight of what she could see in the teeth of the comb. There were green reeds and silted sand grains, things that she knew could only come from the deepest part of the loch. Hadn't the fisherman told her about that? Oh my. She pushed his head off and she got up and she ran. And she knew, because she'd been listening to the tales, and inside she knew she had to reach the burn before the water horse did, because this was surely Echushka. And he would take her to the depths of the loch and she would drown and die and no one would know wherever she was. She ran and she ran and she ran. And the water horse came to properly and took his own self, his own form, and started to run after her. Now, the water horse is very fleet of foot, but she'd got a little bit ahead of him and she knew where she was going. And with her heart pumping and her limbs really, really stretching to take as much of the ground that she could at one bolt, she found the burn and she leapt across it. And the water horse could not follow, because you know a fairy horse cannot cross running water. Did you not know that? Keep that in mind. Morag learned a lesson that day, and so did her father. From that day to this, he's never been to the shailing near the loch. They went elsewhere. Their cattle might not be so fat and fed well, but at least they're still alive. And there is a story that my ancestor then, or was it one of his forebears, had another go with Echushka, with the Kelpie, and actually managed to get the Kelpie's bridle. And from that day to this, the MacGregor clan are known to be masters of the Kelpie. Now, I'm wondering if that is the case. And I'm wondering if that truly is the nature of the water horse. Have a think about that the next time you go past a body of water, because you know, there's always more than one story, and you might be the hero of the next. Thank you.
Leslie, that was fab.
That was great. Great.
I was sitting on the edge of my seat. I don't think I'll look at the Kelpies again in the same way.
Like most fairy things, they're not all bad, but they're not all good either. You know, there's so many of them in Shetland. They're called the Schupel tree, or the tangy, which they share with Orkney, and in Orkney they're also called nuggles, which sound great. But actually, they entrap children, supposedly. And because children always want to ride on the back of a pony, and they look like little ponies. So Shetland, it would be the Shetland pony, because they're tiny and they're really nice, you know. They're really fast, though. And so when they get someone who decides that they're fed up walking and wants to jump on the back of this pony and just go for a ride, their hair is really sticky and it kind of grabs onto them, like Velcro almost, you know, super Velcro. And they pull them into the nearest body of water and drown them. And, you know, so that's basically a tale. All of these tales are mainly ways of telling people to beware of certain things and to hold the history of a place. Some of the water horse stories, I believe, may have come from the clearances, talking about the way that villages were ravaged and razed to the ground during the clearances. and the people there just dispersed and no one knew where they went. And some of the women who would have left the village perhaps would have been taken by the water horse.
Yeah.
Because that was but also Kelpies are known to be female spirits, and they turn into women who are doing the whole, oh, save me, help me.
All right.
And then they turn into their form and take them off into the loch and drown them. But of course, our most famous Ekushka is Nessie.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So that's why I love that story. It's one of my favourite stories, and I hold it to my heart. But the one that I really, really love is Shona and the Water Horse. It's a grand story, and it tells the way of how the water horse actually has a heart of kindness, because he falls in love with Shona. And so he wants to take her to protect her from the devil who's coming to raise the village and to take all the souls that are there. So that's why I think it might be the clearances, a metaphor about the clearances.
Yeah.
But he doesn't want the devil to get her because he wants to take her for himself. And that's a grand story. It's a bit too long for 10 minutes. But Morag, and it is true, there is a legend that the MacGregor clan hold a Kelpie's bridle.
I've got MacGregor blood.
Oh, we're associated by marriage, mainly.
Yeah. No.
Somewhere down there.
I did it. One of my female lines goes onto the MacGregors, so from up near kind of Creef direction. So,
Oh, there you go. Maybe somewhere in ancestry there's a bridle that you can get onto a Kelpie and rule the loch.
I'm going to be dreaming differently tonight.
See, that's the power of a good story. That's the power of good folklore. And it also tells the history of the place.
Yeah.
Because you're hearing about a lifestyle, about a way that somewhere was and how it was to live in that time. And maybe, as far as fairy tales are concerned, particularly, they're not really for adults, for children. They're for adults.
Yeah.
Children are the ones that we pour them into and tell them about. However, it's mainly the adults that we're telling and teaching. You really don't want to go into that forest because there are things that can happen in there that you don't want to happen to you or your children. So they'd use it to tell the children after a while. And then the Victorians got hold of it with their interesting morality. And they're happy ever after.
One of the things actually that I'd been thinking about this week was, I was a brownie, the brownie guides, and it was all about fairies, so you had your pack of brownies and you had this toadstool that sat in the middle that you put your money in every week and you would say your promise, and every team had, you had the elves and the gnomes, right. And and I mean I think that probably was one of my earliest experiences of.
Well, when you think about it, the Scottish brownie, the actual brownie fairy story, the brownie is a helper, a little helper, a little fairy helper, and if you thank them, they disappear.
Yeah,
they don't want to be thanked. They do it because that's how they, and if you happen to leave a bit of milk or a bit of porridge or a little bit of honey or something out and forget about it on purpose, they'd be quite happy to do that and stay with you and clear all your little problems away and do all your little bit of stuff. However, I thought about that for a long time, and I was speaking to someone at a shamanic conference a long while ago, and she was discussing brownies and she said, do you think they're real? And I said, well, when you think about it, we used to be very, very dark skinned. Up in the Highlands, they were very dark skinned and they were very small people, and they lived under the ground in these round houses under the ground with just a little bit sticking up at the top, and so they would be maybe about, the tallest would maybe about 5 foot, and they, I think, are probably where the idea of the brownie came from.
Yeah, quite logical. But no, that's great. So Lesley is a member of the Kilted Ancestors group. Feel free to reach out and chat to her if you have any questions about Scottish folklore or want to put any rumours to bed. She's the person to go to, and I'll put some details and links to Leslie's social media next to the Facebook Live event as well. So thank you very much, Leslie.
Thank you. That was
for
wonderful.
Thank you.
listening to the story. Thank you.